Pretty much since the release of Splatoon 3, Big Bubbler has been in a really awkward spot. It's not bad by any means, it's always been fine power-wise and has gotten some nice buffs in the past. Despite this, it never really saw much play. It could never really find a place for itself in the meta. Well, that is until recently. To understand Big Bubbler's rise, we kind of need to understand what led up to this. So let's take our minds back to about 10 months ago. Back when Chill Season was about to release and we were excited to see Bluefin Depot return. So if you've been in the competitive scene for a while or are just a Pro-Chara watcher, you may remember this time as being the era of no meta. This era, as I see it at least, is the perfect example of what an early meta game looks like. Generally players are really quick at finding out what the strongest things are. We knew at the time that Cooler was the best special in the game and that Trizuka wasn't far behind, but we had absolutely no idea about what to do about that. And the only way to find out was to spend a lot of time theory crafting and a lot of time experimenting. We did finally settle on a meta, and unsurprisingly it was one that centered around Cooler. It's quite an interesting special. It can't damage you, it doesn't one-shot you, it doesn't paint, it doesn't even protect you, kinda. Tactical is entirely just a main weapon buffer. It makes you run fast, strafe fast, and gives you perfect accuracy. And of course a bunch of cure and special saver. This special really wants you to pick up your main gun and fight the enemy team. All of its buffs are supposed to either make you a better fighter or reduce the risk that comes with fighting. So what weapons best synergize with Tactical? Fighting weapons, obviously. We're talking Squeezer, Slosher, Sloshing Machine, Range Blaster, Spatana Stamper, Tenterbrella, and 52 Gal. And you'll notice that with the exception of 52 Gal, these are all also mid-range weapons. We are in a mid-range meta. I think we can all agree that mid-range metas are pretty fun. They tend to put a large emphasis on fighting using your main weapon, and this really toxic sit back and spam playstyles are pretty rare. A key defining feature of a lot of mid-range weapons is their low paint output, and so by extension they have low special output. Even though there are 3 mid-range weapons with Trizuka, Zuka is not being spammed anywhere near as much as it was back in the double and triple shot era, since, again, mid-range weapons just can't get Zukas as quickly. Comps that focus on mid-range weapons do tend to have one player reserved for paint and special spamming to cover that weakness, but that role is filled by one player. It can be exploited, as I may or may not get to later. But now that we've set the stage, we can finally start talking about Big Bubbler. And the main thing you need to know about Big Bubbler is that it is reliant on its big health pool to have a big impact on the game. Its health pool is so big that the big majority of main weapons in the game really struggle to break Big Bubbler because they just don't have the damage output. As a general rule, Big Bubbler has really good matchups against a lot of main weapons. There are some exceptions like Spatana Stamper, but this is a general rule. Specials on the other hand, it tends to struggle against. There are a bunch of specials out there that either have insane damage, can ignore shield entirely, or do both. Even still, there are some exceptions, and there are 2 that I want to highlight. The first one being, obviously, Trizuka. Big Bubbler has been considered a Zuka check for quite a while now. It used to be that it would take 3 Zuka shots aimed at the weak points to break Bubbler. A fair 1-to-1 trade. Though, given that Zuka is the second strongest special in the game, it's somewhat weighted in Bubble's favour. But then, patch 8.1 rolled around and decreased Zuka's damage to Bubble by 1/3. So yeah, Bubble plays really well into Zuka now. And the second one I want to highlight is, surprisingly, Tactical. Even though Cooler doesn't interact with the Bubble itself, it buffs main weapons. And since it doesn't give a damage buff, it doesn't matter how much Cooler buffs your main weapons, Bubbler is still just going to stand there menacingly. Additionally, a weakness of Cooler against Bubbler is the opportunity cost that comes with a special that isn't a bubble counter. You go from having 4 potential counters to 3. That goes down to 2 if you're running a double Cooler comp. So while Big Bubbler is on the weaker end of specials, if we somehow ever found ourselves magically in a meta full of Coolers and Zukas, Bubble would become a relatively strong pick thanks to its matchups. Funny how that works out. Unfortunately though, this isn't enough to make Bubble a real meta threat, not on its own. Remember what I said about Bubble having bad matchups to specials? Well, these matchups are really bad. It's not hard to abuse this. Weapons like Junior and Zinc Mini never saw much play in standard meta comps for this reason. If you're including them in your comp, there isn't any synergy between the main weapon and their special, and there likely isn't any synergy between the special and the comp it's in, so all of its value is derived entirely from how well it can stop Trizukas. Which also means that all of your value disappears if the enemy team throws one single Tri-Strike at you and you lose the ability to stop Trizukas. But there is a way to make it work. Quick respawn comps are a team archetype that has existed pretty much since the dawn of time. The idea of the comp is pretty simple. You get a bunch of strong fighting weapons that have really high mobility like Tetras, Brush, or any of the Splatanas, give them a bunch of quick respawn, and throw them at the enemy team. There's more nuance to that, but that's just the general gist. These comps never dominate the meta, but they've always been there. Thanks to the weapons featured in this style of comp, it has a very fast pace. They try to use this by striking the enemy team before they can get set up or stabilize their position. They're also really good at target selection, picking off one or two high priority players, usually the supports and the backlines. But this comp does have some weaknesses. One is obviously going to be paint. Not only does it tend to include some not great painting weapons, but the whole game plan is about running headfirst into the enemy team, which doesn't give you much time to paint. This comp also struggles to stabilize their positions. You're running a bunch of short range weapons that really struggle to hold space. They spend their time running headfirst into the enemy team again, where they are at constant danger of dying. Sure, they're great at fighting for space, but they can really struggle to keep it sometimes. If only there were one or two weapons in the game that had tools to cover for these weaknesses. If only. Yeah, so both Junior and Zimmy have like exactly what they need. They not only have the paint to be able to follow their teammates around, painting over all the space their team has won for them, they also have Big Bubbler, a really strong stabilizing force. If a position is looking a bit unstable, they can pop a bubble to try and buy time for their team to consolidate. So for example, if your team wins a fight but goes 2 players down, Bubble can be used to stop the remaining players from being rushed down while the other 2 respawn, as well as give them a safe place to jump to. There is a lot of synergy between this style of comp and a Big Bubbler, making it something you want to run regardless of the meta. On top of that, this comp has had some recent developments. The release of Sizzle Season 2024 saw the release of a weapon that fits perfectly into this style of comp. A weapon with strong fighting power and combat mobility that also has Big Bubbler. The Sword Brush. This is relevant not only because it opens up the possibility of switching your support to something like an end tap, it also lets you run double bubble, which feels like it shouldn't work, but I can't see a reason why it shouldn't. In a comp like this, the weakness of bubble just doesn't matter as much. In a team like this, bubble doesn't get all its value from being a meta counter. Not only does it have a lot of synergy with its team, but when it's on decav, it has a lot of synergy with its main weapon. So if it ever gets shredded by Tri-Strike, it's not as soul destroying. Not that it's gonna get shredded by Tri-Strike. Remember how I said the strength of this comp is target selection? Well, this means that the QR team is able to focus its efforts down on any specific player. In this case, it would be players who have bubble counters. In a meta where there's lots of tacticals and Tri-Strikes, there are less players who pose a threat to your bubble, and so it's a lot easier to lock down threats to maximize bubble value. This is even easier in a meta with low special output like this one. The go-to meta comp right now can have up to 2 Tri-Strikes, but since only one of them is going to be spamming Tri-Strikes, only one of them needs to be focused down, making it easier to set up your bubbles for success. But that's not the only way to make bubble work. I wanted to highlight quick respawn comps because that's an archetype that I think gets overlooked quite a lot. But another weapon that has been championing Big Bubbler for quite a while now is Splat Roller. We initially underestimated the value of Splat Roller since the omnipresence of armor in Splatoon 2 made Roller just unplayable, not helped by its poor choice of kits either. In this game though, the combo of Roller and Bubble is utterly terrifying. Normally one of the main counterplays to Bubble is just for you to run into the bubble and fight whoever's inside. If it's a Roller though, you don't want to be rushing that. They can and will kill you the moment you so much as think about entering that bubble. On top of that, Bubbler gives the unique ability to both create space and hold space really well to one weapon. A Roller can very easily shark for a kill to create space for its team, and once it gets that kill, it can then pop Bubbler in that spot to solidify that part of the map as yours immediately. It doesn't need to wait for its support player to catch up. I also want to highlight Roller as it's a main weapon that can very easily fit into different comps, especially the style of comp that is meta right now, as while it does have team requirements, it's not super strict. It's still a one-trick weapon though. You're not going to see a lot of different players flex onto Roller, but it's defo still worth mentioning as it's probably the most relevant bubble weapon right now. So I normally like to end these by discussing what I'd change about XYZ, but the thing about this is that I'm talking about why things are working rather than why they aren't, so I'm not really sure how to end this.